everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We are so thrilled to bring this famous Dead Artist series back. After how many years? My goodness. After 2021 was the last one. And so thanks again for supporting us. And I just want to say something. As far as the house goes, please respect the house. Don't touch anything. Don't lean up against walls and that sort of thing. It's an old house and it needs gentle caring. And we do want to thank Kate Tully. Community service person and allowing us here to present this. Also, I'd like to mention Margie Burr. Margie's in the blue sweater. Margie has written every single script for how many years?
2007, and this is the 29th one.
Wow.
Together a bit. So, okay. Please turn off cell phones. The bathroom, there's one bathroom. It's a house, it's an old house. And I will be stationed over here, and it's around the corner. There's Terry, she's showing us. We'll get you there and we'll get you back. Yeah, there will be one intermission. And we do have some water on the glass table in the front parlor if you're needing of something like that. Help yourself at intermission. And basically, I think that's about it. We do want to thank the Long Shadow. I've done that to them before. Foundation, because they agreed to sponsor this, and in fact, they sponsored a number of the older ones as well. So they're all thrilled to have it back too. But enjoy. We will, after the show, there, if you feel like you want to stay for just a little bit and ask some questions of Kevin, the moderator, or our Orson Welles, please do. And with that, enjoy the show.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming today. So what words can possibly convey the larger-than-life and multi-talented character that is the subject of today's interview? I offer these for your consideration. Visionary, dilettante, boy wonder, peak too early, risk taker,
shit stir.
Shit stir works too. Storyteller, fabulist, uncompromising, tyrant, fearless, foolhardy, conjurer,
Charlatan.
or charlatan. At age 22, our guest formed the Mercury Theater, a repertory independent theater company that politicized the classics. At age 22, his radio production of H.G. Wells' science fiction novel, The War of the Worlds, terrified a nation. 2 years later, he produced, directed, co-wrote, and starred in Citizen Kane, a cinematic masterpiece that wrote the book on film grammar. His demands for absolute creative control branded him difficult, unreliable by the Hollywood studio system, and forced him into exile as one of the first American independent filmmakers. The last 4 decades of his life left a trail of squandered opportunities, aborted, abandoned, unfinished projects. Our guest once quipped that if you want a happy ending, that will depend, of course, on where you stop your story. So I think it's time we start his story. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Orson Welles.
A magnificent introduction. I'll do my best to meet or exceed expectations.
Mr. Welles, thank you for joining us today. May I call you Orson?
Yes, it'd be ridiculous if you didn't.
Thank you. It was tricky establishing contact with you, but our efforts did pay off. We are honored to have you here today as the first guest in our Reinvented Dead Artist series.
Well, Kevin, old musicians never die. They just disappear temporarily. I could tell through telepathic communication, mentalism being one of my tricks, that you were looking for an out-of-this-world guest. Well, here I am, traveling from one dimension to the next, no worse for the wear.
Well, Orson, your films often employed a non-linear form of storytelling. Will you be disappointed if we take a more conventional chronological approach?
So, we'll take a 1, 2, 3 ABC approach. I wasn't granted creative license, so I'm at the mercy of your will.
Well, I did anticipate your demands, so I offer you a copy of my production notes for your editing, of course. All right, shall we begin with the origin of your story?
People have better recollections of their lives than I do. People usually tend to forget what they want to forget, either on purpose or subconsciously. I'm sure you'll tell stories that I'll be forced to remember or believed happened. But one thing will be for sure. By the end of this, neither one of us will know what is true.
Well, you were born George Orson Welles, May 6, 1915, the son of Richard and Beatrice Welles. Your brother, also named Richard, was 10 years older, and sadly he struggled all his life with psychiatric issues.
10 shrieking pounds of me arrived at 7 o'clock in the morning. People were waking up to go to work at the factories, so bells and whistles were blowing, heralding my birth.
Well, you're a child of the Midwest, born in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a prospering manufacturing town at the time, on Lake Michigan, just 65 miles north of Chicago.
A reporter once had the temerity to ask me if I blamed my parents for having me in such an ordinary place. I said no. I don't blame my parents for Kenosha. Kenosha, however, blames my parents for me.
Well, it's said that genes are not our destiny, but they load the gun. Tell us about your parents.
My mother and father were marvelously wonderful, more remarkable than any story I could have made about them. They were great charmers, but entirely unsuitable for marriage.
Your father, Richard Head Welles, invented and patented a carbide lamp for bicycles while he was the chief clerk at the Badger Brass Manufacturing Company, and he sold his shares in the company and made a fortune.
Calling my father an inventor is more respectful than calling him for what he really was, a playboy. His real vocations for which he gave his heart and soul were gambling, travel, wine, women, and song. He was a good storyteller, though, and a great wit.
It seems, too, that your father relished the popular entertainment of music halls, vaudeville shows, and spectator sports, but he shunned the so-called highbrow pursuits.
My father thought the arts were morally objectionable and frivolous. He actively cultivated a hatred for artists, calling them aristocratic Philistines.
Beatrice Lucy Ives, your mother, was a stately, celebrated beauty. She was a brilliant concert pianist who performed and gave lectures on avant-garde composers such as Stravinsky and Ravel. An outspoken activist for women's suffrage, in 1914, she became one of the first women in the Midwest to be elected to public office, serving on the Kenosha School Board.
Mother had a passion for arts, education, justice, and service to the community. She was a lot of things, but she was also tough-handed and kind-hearted. She spoke in this distinctive, melodious tone. I called her cello voice. I strived to live up to her standards. It's probably why I worked so much. That's the stuff that fuels the engine.
Called to your home to treat a family member, Dr. Maurice Bernstein entered your life. Why is the story of your introduction to him as an 18-month-old toddler memorable?
Allegedly, I stood up in my crib and looked at the distinguishedly dressed man and said, "The desire to take medicine is what separates humans from animals." How's that for an opening line?
Astonished by your precocity, Dr. Bernstein pronounced you a genius in the making, and you profited from his constant encouragement. He presented you with a series of educational gifts such as a conductor's baton, painting and sculpting equipment, a puppet theater, a theatrical makeup case, and a violin, which you were too small to grasp properly.
The label of genius was a burden. I never knew I wasn't one until middle-aged.
But from an early age, you were a bright and beguiling child. You honed your skills as a performer and a provocateur at your mother's gatherings, only to avoid banishment to the nursery.
Mother believed that a child must justify themselves by being interesting or clever. I always gravitated towards the adults and ignored their absurdities. They found my presence amusing, but I could be cheeky. One time at one of my mother's parties, an opera diva asked me, "Did you like my singing?" I said it was terrible. Technically, you have a lot to learn.
So your parents' marriage, unfortunately, was not a happy one. Your father didn't anticipate that your mother would so actively persist in her artistic aspirations after marriage. Dr. Bernstein, whom you fondly called Dada, had wielded his way into your family. Intent on turning you into an artist, Dada had also formed a passionate attachment to your mother, with whom he shared cultural interests.
Dada Bernstein had a knack of getting himself into triangles as the third wheel. Women loved him. My mother wasn't the first. He was suave and slippery and had this great wealth of musical knowledge which attracted my mother to him. It also helped to have a doctor on call for my mother's liver issues. My father, however, grew bitter about the situation and began to drink heavily.
Unable to reconcile their differences, your parents separated when you were 4. You moved to Chicago with your mother, and she flourished there, establishing salons for artists and musicians. Dr. Bernstein followed close behind. Unfettered by familial obligations, your father traveled the world, dividing his time between his homes in Jamaica and Peking.
When my parents separated, I never felt a partisanship. Seeing them individually, I was granted twice the love.
While most children your age were struggling to put together coherent sentences, you were a musical prodigy who played the piano and the violin, a voracious reader who devoured Shakespeare and the Bible, a budding artist who painted and drew cartoons, and a fledgling poet who wrote verse.
I was born middle-aged and remained that way until old age.
Well, and
Childhood was a prison I was so desperately trying to escape.
you eschewed conventional education, viewing it with disdain.
I once faked an attack of appendicitis just to get out of going to a kindergarten where I would have been stuck with kids whose only aspirations were to become Boy Scouts.
Tragedy struck when your mother died of jaundice at age 40, a day after your 9th birthday. Summoned to her sick room to say goodbye, she recited Shakespeare and presented you with a cake, the candles flickering in the dark room.
This cake, my mother said, is just like any other cakes. The candles, a fairy ring. And never again will you have this number of candles on your cake. You must puff hard, she said, and blow out all your candles and make a wish. And so I puffed hard. The room went dark. And my mother vanished forever. Sometimes on cold nights, I'm forced to remember my mistakes. My biggest one being that I've forgotten to make a wish.
Your mother's death leaves you with an enduring legacy of anguished loss. She became the guiding spirit that influenced the direction of your life. And upon her death, your father and Dr. Bernstein became your dual guardians. Your father was out of the country often, returning occasionally to take you on extended trips to Europe, Asia, and the Caribbean. Dr. Bernstein was deemed the more reliable choice to nurture a bright but unruly child in need of guidance.
It was a battle over me. Both my father and Dada wanted to control the course of my path. Will art or commerce win out in the end?
On the advice of Dr. Bernstein, you enrolled in the Todd School for Boys, a progressive preparatory school located in Woodstock, Illinois. Todd School focused on holistic hands-on experiences and prioritized creative endeavors over traditional curriculum.
Todd School recognized that boyhood was not preparation for life, but life itself in its most exquisite sense. They knew that learning wasn't about reciting things. It was about thinking things, doing things. That is the joy of learning.
The headmaster, Roger Hill, nicknamed Skipper, encouraged students to pursue what interested them. They had access to resources such as a machine shop, a print shop, a book bindery, allowing them to develop skills in various areas. So tell us a little more about Skipper.
Skipper was always galloping on some hobby horse with tremendous enthusiasm. He liked flying, so Todd had an airport. He liked dogs, so he built a kennel. He had a fascination with livestock and crop management, so Todd had a working farm.
Hill became a mentor and lifelong friend, and early on recognized you as talented to the point of genius. Did he nurture your burgeoning interest in theater?
I absorbed everything I could about theater. I read plays, theater magazines. I studied the theory and history of drama. I was particularly drawn to Berlin, Germany's theater, and wondered how they could combine cabaret with the classical.
You held a lifelong reverence for Shakespeare. At Todd School, you adapted, designed, directed, and acted in numerous Shakespearean plays, including Twelfth Night, Richard III, and Julius Caesar. You also appeared in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, both Androcles and Lion and Jesus Christ. You formed a touring company called Todd's Troopers, And despite your youth, you still assumed an imposing directorial persona.
I directed those poor, unfortunate souls with a large stick that I repeatedly slammed into the footlights to emphasize a point.
Your father occasionally visited you at Todd's school. He would stand at the back of the auditorium and watch you perform, but would often leave before the play was over. Can you explain that?
My father pretended that he didn't have an interest in my acting career, or any damn thing for that matter. He thought with the influence of Dada and Skipper, I was lost to him.
However, you and your father did share a love of magic shows, and in March of 1926, you attended Houdini's record-breaking show at the Princess Theater in Chicago. Now, your father, who knew Houdini, took you backstage to introduce you to him. What was that experience like?
Houdini was an expert in miracles, the best showman I ever knew. He taught me my first slight trick, magic trick, called the pass. He said, you must never perform a trick on stage unless you have practiced it 1,000 times. I went with him to a joke shop where he bought a lamp trick. He told the salesperson, I'm going to use this in my show tonight. 1,000 times, huh?
In July 1930, you embark on a world tour with your father, taking a ship to Shanghai. You were 15 years old. The trip marked your final time together. Why?
I became the parent to the parent. At that time, his drinking was getting out of control, and I found myself paying his bar bills when he had too many gins. I told him I will never see him again until he stopped drinking. I won't see him again until he stopped drinking. And he did.
In December 1930, your father dies of a heart and kidney failure in a Chicago hotel, aged 58. Do you blame yourself for your father's death?
I am convinced now, as I was back then, that I had killed him with my ultimatum.
Your father's will stipulated that you were to choose your guardian, Dada Bernstein or Skipper Hill. Skipper declined, aware that if he did accept that, he would break Dada Bernstein's heart.
After graduating, Dada and Skipper were convinced that I should go to Yale or Harvard. Higher education didn't appeal to me, so I requested to take a painting holiday in Ireland.
Henceforth, you traveled through the picturesque west coast of Ireland with a donkey and a cart, painting watercolor landscapes by day and sleeping under the stars at night.
I stumbled upon a lost Eden, rich in romance and bountiful beauty. The people had eyes and hearts as clear as I've ever seen. They gave me food when I was hungry, a place to lay when I was tired, and I repaid their kindness in watercolors.
With winter coming on, you head to Dublin in search of work, and you arrive at the Gate Theatre, where you persuaded the managers that you were a noted Broadway actor. Seeing through your ruse, they hired you anyway.
I was so desperate not to be educated that I went into the theater. I fell in love with it soon after.
Well, there were two major theaters in Dublin at the time. The Abbey, known as the National Theatre of Ireland. They pioneered homespun style of Irish drama. The Gate, known for its experimental avant-garde production, inspired by a German expressionistic theater. So, which one was your preference?
The Gate opened my eyes. This was an active, aggressive kind of theater that combined all the elements to create an extraordinary theatrical experience.
Attending a summer drama festival at the Todd School after your return to America, you made your first film, Hearts of Age. A 5-minute reel featured you heavily made up as Death, beckoning an old woman to her grave. In December 1934, you eloped with that old woman, a 19-year-old actress, Virginia Nicholson. Virginia became the first of your 3 wives.
We only got married to live together. Neither one of us took it very seriously.
But the union does result in the birth of Christopher, the first of your 3 daughters. You chose her name because it had a nice ring to it. But being a dependable husband and father was not your forte?
I never experienced the traditional husband and father where marriage and family, well, it interfered with my freedom and my creativity. In the end, I chose freedom over stability.
Through strategic social connections, you were hired by Catherine Cornell, who was dubbed the First Lady of the American Theater. You joined her touring company production of Romeo and Juliet.
Opening night changed my life. John Houseman was in the audience.
John Houseman was the director of the Federal Theater Project, so-called Negro Theater Unit in Harlem. The NTU was part of the New Deal program during the Great Depression that produced theatrical works by and for African American actors and audiences. How did that influence you?
Harlem was alive with art, music, literature. Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Duke Ellington was all exploring what it meant to be black. Houseman and I wanted to present classical theater in a fresh and meaningful way. Why shouldn't Shakespeare be enjoyed by everyone?
Houseman hired you to direct a production of Shakespeare's Macbeth. You reimagined the setting and introduced elements that lent authenticity.
Voodoo Macbeth, as we called it, moved the setting from medieval Scotland to 19th century Caribbean islands representing Haiti. The parallel between Macbeth's tyranny and the Caribbean islands' dictatorship worked for the time. We substituted the witches with Haitian and African spiritual practices.
Rehearsals began in the fall of 1935 with a cast of 150 black actors.
None of them had played Shakespeare before, but they eventually got the rhythm of his poetry and made it sound conversational and still kept what Shakespeare intended it to be.
However, before the play opened, there was significant tension in the Harlem community. A man described as a local extremist attacked you with a razor, convinced that you were creating a racist spectacle designed to humiliate black people. True?
There were some tension among the cast and crew because they felt like I was being too condescending. They had a fear that I would turn the show into some glorified minstrel show.
Opening night, April 14, 1936, at the Lafayette Theater in Harlem. It was a resounding success. It drew massive integrated crowd of 10,000 people. How did that go?
You couldn't get near the theater in Harlem. 5 blocks of traffic were cut off. Anybody who was anybody was at that theater. We had so many curtain calls, they decided to just leave the curtain up. The audience came onto the stage, congratulated the actors. It was magical. One of the greatest success of my life was that show.
Voodoo Macbeth received rave reviews, citing the visual stunning sex, special effects, costumes, and innovative use of voodoo elements. A voice of dissent, critic Percy Hammond panned the cast for the lackluster, inaudible performance, and this provoked a response from the drummers.
Yes. They made a voodoo doll out of Hammond. And it proved to be effective. He died shortly thereafter.
The production toured several East Coast cities, but you canceled a stop in Cincinnati because local officials insisted on integrated performances. Today, Voodoo Macbeth is regarded as racially problematic for its use of reductive, stereotypical elements of Haitian voodoo and for the colonial dynamic created by a white director working with a black cast.
Voodoo Macbeth brought a lot of festering racism to the surface. It did not change the landscape of racism in theater. After the production was over, many of the technicians and the actors found themselves right back where they started, relegated in minor or, very superficial or roles. Mm-hmm. Conservative politicians targeted the Negro theater unit and its integrated cast, calling it un-American and pro-communist.
In the spring of 1937, you collaborate with composer Mark Bernstein on his pro-union folk opera, The Cradle Will Rock. Set in Steeltown, USA, it featured a cast of satirical characters who commented on the themes of social justice, corruption, greed, and the struggle for power between the working class and the government.
Cradle Will Rock was meant to stir public opinion. It was a parable about capitalism, a cartoon of American society and its contradictions.
Federal authorities from the Work Progress Administration got wind of the project. On opening night, they padlocked the theater and stationed armed guards to prevent anyone from entering, including the actors, or from removing props, costumes, or sets. What happened there?
The padlock was an insult. We marched with the audience 10 blocks to the next theater. There were union rules about the performers being on stage, so Mark got on there with his piano, and we stationed actors throughout the theater who would stand up and sing. It was better than the original production.
The political climate, however, was changing. Influential Republican lawmakers opposed subsidizing projects that were critical of the government. Congress began investigating. Stay with me. Okay. Congress began investigating the federal theater project for alleged communist infiltration. Although the FDP had broad public support, congressional conservatives successfully cut its funding in 1939, ending the project.
Budget cuts were the pretext. The agenda is always political.
The immediate outcome of the controversy, however, was that in August 1937, you and John Houseman broke with the Federal Theater Project and formed an independent repertory company, the Mercury Theater.
We produced 4 or 5 classical plays relevant to the current situation. Aesthetics came first. We never chose a play because it held some type of popular political opinion.
Shakespeare's Julius Caesar is the Mercury Theater's inaugural production in November 1937. It drew explicit parallels to the rise of fascism in Europe. Prescient for its time, the production premiered 2 years before Hitler invaded Poland, starting the war.
It was an urgent war cry against fascism. Shakespeare's messages are universal and timeless. We were living through a power grab of the 1930s that Shakespeare wrote about in 1599.
Well, here you substituted elaborate sets of classical architecture for the unadorned red bricks of the theater. Actors wore trench coats and fedoras instead of togas. Stark lighting created an intense, unsettling atmosphere that transfixed the audience. Where did that inspiration come from?
I was aware of German filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl's film Triumph of the Will about the Nuremberg rallies in Germany. The Nazis used anti-war craft searchlights to circle the ground, pointing the light upwards. This created a cathedral of light that conveyed a sense of power and menace.
Julius Caesar also exposed the mob psychology as a direct and terrifying parallel to the rise of fascism in contemporary Europe, as compared to ancient Rome, correct?
We expose the personal greed, fear, and hysteria that surrounds the regime of a dictator. The Roman citizens were not a fickle crowd, but individually were susceptible to manipulation by demigods. That is how mass movements are started.
Critics awarded Julius Caesar rave reviews, calling it one of the most exciting dramatic events of our time. It opened on November 11, 1937, and ran for 157 performances. What was it like to enjoy this impressive level of success at age 22?
Anybody who has trouble being successful has no sympathy from me. I had a tremendous streak of luck that I am very grateful for, and I'm not being falsely modest. Luck has everything to do with a person's life. Nobody is promised anything. You either have good luck or you have bad luck.
You acquired a reputation as an autocratic director, ruthless, tough, disciplined. You held rehearsals until 3 and 4 a.m. Your temper was explosive if things did not pass muster.
When you are as young as I was, you resort to all sorts of unreasonable tactics to maintain control and authority. When I shouted, it was theater. The cast and crew had to remember one simple rule. I owned the house.
While you were directing Mercury Theater productions, you lent your distinctive voice to more than a dozen weekly radio programs. Your most legendary role was Lamont Cranston in the popular mystery series The Shadow. And I didn't know, it was the only pre-recorded radio program at the time.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows. I said that every week to every child in America. I found it to also be a deterrent in my own life. You see, I was in a rather compromising position with a woman not my wife. When Lamont Cranston's voice came over the radio, crime does not pay. Well, that killed the mood.
In 1938, CBS offered the Mercury Theater a 1-hour radio drama series. You had multiple radio shows in New York in the 1930s, all going on at various times in different locations. You were constantly showing up late for programs because you had to take cabs from station to station through congested New York City traffic. How did you solve that?
I discovered that you don't have to be sick in order to ride in an ambulance. I took to using them to get from gig to gig. It's amazing how the sound of a siren can clear an intersection.
The weekly CBS show featured adaptations of classic literary works such as Dracula, The Count of Monte Cristo, and Treasure Island. The Mercury Theater team developed innovative techniques, setting new standards for radio storytelling, influencing modern podcasts and audiobook recordings of today.
Radio is theater of the mind. I wanted the audience to experience the story as it happened, play to their expectations, and draw them into a conspiracy.
Your programs also used silence strategically.
Silence. can be as unnerving and dramatic as sound.
Tell me. Mercury Theater's hour-long adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, here it is, aired on Sunday, October 30, 1938, and the broadcast simulated news bulletins of a Martian invasion and caused widespread panic.
We did issue a disclaimer at the beginning of the program, but you see, at the time, Mercury Theater was competing with a ventriloquist dummy called McCarthy. Charlie McCarthy. The problem occurred that people got bored of McCarthy after 10 minutes and turned the dial.
Well, rather than presenting the story as a typical play, War of the Worlds delivered a series of realistic-sounding news bulletins interrupting a musical broadcast.
It began with a musical program to put the audience at ease. The interrupting news bulletins began slow and uncertain and then escalated quickly. This mimicked how a real news disaster might unfold.
Remote field reports from various fictional locations, such as Grover's Mill, New Jersey, the site of the Martian landing, created a sense of immediacy and believability. You used a range of sophisticated sound effects that were crucial to painting a terrifying picture for the listener.
Radio was still a relatively new medium, but Americans saw it as their source of news. Because they couldn't confirm the actual Martian invasion, they used their active imaginations to fill in the details.
The morning after the broadcast, you found yourself on the front pages of the newspapers nationwide. Summoned to a press conference with CBS, you faced public outrage, potential lawsuits. You did issue an apology, though, disavowing malicious intent.
I foreseen some kind of concern, but was shocked by the level of panic. My friend, the critic Alexander Wolcott, sent me a telegram saying, "This just goes to prove, my Beamish boy, that only the intelligent people listen to Charlie McCarthy."
Well, historians now regard the extent of the panic as exaggerated. Numerous listeners mistook the fictional invasion for a German attack, showing how the program tapped into the pre-existing anxieties on the eve of World War II. The War of the Worlds broadcast profoundly affected the future of radio, highlighting its unique power as a medium for both information and manipulation. It ended the practice of using realistic, breaking news style formats for fictional radio dramas.
War of the Worlds was a cautionary tale of the power of media and the gullibility of humans. People should not believe everything they read in the newspapers or hear on the radio. This being 2026 and not 1938. I strongly caution my audience. Do not believe everything you see on, is it X?
X.
X, YouTube, Facebook, or your legacy media.
Okay, duly warned. The broadcast solidified your reputation as an inventive mischief maker. And at age 24, you found yourself an international celebrity appearing on the front cover of Time magazine.
I didn't go to jail. I went to Hollywood, which turned out to be a more sustained punishment.
Struck by the brilliance and audacity of War of the Worlds, RKO Studios in Hollywood courted you, initially as an actor. Your interests lie in directing as well as acting, and eventually you were offered an unprecedented 2-picture deal, later expanded to 3 pictures, with total creative control, which included the authority to develop the story, cast the actors, and have final cut. This was an unheard of level of power for a first-time director. The Mercury Theater actors, of course, accompanied you to Tinseltown.
I held out for the impossible idea that I would have been left alone. I wanted to make movies without the studio poking their nose into my business.
RKO Studio executive George Schaefer exalted you as a theatrical wunderkind. Hiring you was a high-risk, high-reward gamble. The studio was counting on your gifts to produce a prestige picture that would attract critical acclaim, render RKO financially solvent, and elevate its shaky profile.
Studio politics are like a Central American republic with palace intrigue, revolutions, and counter-revolutions. RKO was desperate for a savior with bold new ideas to put them back on the map. For my part, making films was like being gifted the biggest electric train set a boy could ever have.
The Hollywood establishment, though, brushed you off as an arrogant upstart and an outsider who had been given too much control. You were widely mocked in the trade press as Little Orson Annie.
It was Knives Out for Orson.
Orson.
Although it wasn't malice against me. It was just cold-blood political maneuvers. For example, I was once dining at Chasen's restaurant when Ward Bond, a character actor, came striding towards my table. When he reached me, he pulled my neck up high and then cut it off with a pair of scissors. I'll leave it to any of the psychiatrists in the audience to figure out what that signified.
On the brink of World War II, you suggested adapting Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness. That explored the subject of racism and colonialism. Your unconventional approach was to situate the camera as the narrator. The idea was rejected. Thoughts?
Heart of Darkness was an allegory about fascism. RKO wasn't too keen about making a film with too much of a political aim, wanting to keep their friendships with the German markets. They also weren't open to hiring black actors. They wanted to hire white actors in blackface. Lastly, I wanted to shoot on location, but those were the days where nobody left the studio.
So you pivot, setting your sights on another film idea.
I wanted to make a failure story, one that would deconstruct the rise and fall of a great American, a story of a man who retreated from democracy, which his money failed to buy him and his power failed to hold. You may be interested to know that this film in question is one of your current president's favorite film.
You directed, produced, and starred in Citizen Kane. You gathered a creative team of artists, technicians, beginning with a seasoned screenwriter, the brilliant but alcoholic Herman Mankiewicz. Mank, as he was called, had written a script on newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. He knew Hearst, and he was drinking buddies with Hearst's mistress, actress Marion Davies. Mank had been a guest at Hearst's sprawling castle, San Simeon, in California, situated on property about the size of Rhode Island. Your partner, John Houseman, and Mank spent 12 weeks in seclusion writing the script originally called American.
Mank's script was pure gold. It was just messy and ungainly. I went in, cleaned it up, gave it structure, focused on the narrative and character motivations. We didn't want to create another solemn biopic. We wanted to create a mystery story about a reporter hunting for the answers.
Citizen Kane's story went through several revisions. An early draft featured a political assassination and a subplot involving Kane's son, a pro-fascist troublemaker, who was then killed in an attack on a Washington, D.C. armory. The final script covered decades of Kane's life, creating a compelling portrait of a nuanced and complicated anti-hero. Would you agree?
Charles Foster Kane was a hero, and a scoundrel, and a no account, and a swell guy, a great lover, a great American, and a downright dirty dog.
Filming began in the summer of 1940. With no prior experience, you learned filmmaking on the job.
There is no more authority in this world than sheer ignorance. It gave me confidence, kept me from making choices that were too timid or too careful. I didn't deliberately set out to make anything. It was all just a matter of why not?
So the great cinematographer Greg Tolan, a veteran of John Ford Westerns, approached you saying that he wanted to work on your movie.
I told Greg that I never worked on a picture before. He said that was perfect because I didn't know what to expect. We could experiment together.
Under Greg's guidance, you learned the tricks of camera work in record time. Your ignorance of cinematic rules proved to be an advantage as you were willing to challenge the conventional wisdom of filmmaking.
Technically, movie making can be learned in a day and a half. It's only slightly more complicated than making a whole movie. I was constantly reaching and hoping and grasping and trying. The one thing I was rock solid on, however, was where to place the cameras.
Well, nearly half of Citizen Kane's scenes rely on some kind of optical effect, miniature, animation. Your collaboration with Tolan resulted in numerous innovations, including deep focus, multi-plane compositions, high contrast lighting, and wide angles, and long takes that were crucial storytelling tools that influenced filmmakers for generations.
Greg pushed the camera's visual story to extremes. Kane's rise was characterized by bright lights, his downfall by dark shadows. Multi-plane compositions and high contrast lighting showed Kane's transition from idealistic dreamer to one that was overtaken by greed and hubris.
The sets were designed by director Perry Ferguson, who worked on high-risk projects for RKO. In what way did he contribute?
Due to budget constraints, Perry constructed sets using very little props. A chunk of corn ice here, a fireplace in the foreground, a chair in the background. It all became imposing and made convincing due to Tolan's camera wizardry.
Composer Bernard Herrmann, the John Williams of his day, composed the score. Groundbreaking for its time, it's considered a masterpiece of conception and expression.
Bernard and I worked together in radio, but this was his first film score. He composed themes that highlighted a character's motivations and emotions. He created the power theme, which highlighted Kane's ruthlessness. And he created the rosebud themes for feelings of more hopefulness.
Well, you arrived at the studio by 4 a.m. and putting in 16 and 18-hour days. It took makeup artist Maurice Siderman 4 hours to apply the custom molded foam, plastic pieces, wrinkles, jowls, thinning hair to simulate the aging Kane. Special contact lenses dimmed your eyes. Prosthetics were applied to your shoulders and chest to create the illusion of an older body. What was the makeup experience like?
It was strangely exhilarating to be made up into Charles Foster Kane. Sorry. Some suggested that I related too much to him. There is a part of Kane that I never saw in myself, perhaps out of blindness.
While you were inhabiting the character of Charles Foster Kane, you also styled yourself as a Hollywood star director. It's said that your assertive theatrical filmmaking process called attention to what was going on behind the camera prior to what was going on in front of it.
You could write all the ideas of all the films on the head of a pin. Ideas are not subject of the film. What mattered was the writing, something that would grasp the audience, take them on an adventure, and involve them emotionally. My films were intentionally theatrical because, well, I didn't want anybody falling asleep while watching them.
You did your best to keep the studio executives off the set. They were forbidden from seeing the rushes at the end of the day. How did you manage that?
Whenever the studios would drop by, or executives would drop by for one of their visits, I yelled, "Break!" And we all go play baseball for 20 minutes. They would have to wait just like anybody else.
Well, George Schaefer, your boss at RKO, was thrilled with the final result. The studio had long aspired to produce prestige pictures, and Citizen Kane embodied that goal. Schaefer screened a rough cut of it privately for influential people, including gossip columnist Hedda Hopper. How did that go?
After the film, Hedda couldn't run fast enough to Hearst to tell him what she had witnessed. A vicious and irresponsible attack on a great man. An impudent, murderous trick even for the boy genius. Hearst then appointed Luella Parsons, to also view the film. What followed was a full-scale campaign to suppress my film and discredit my name.
Well, Hearst's opposition had a devastating effect on Citizen Kane and your career.
Hearst's vengeance was thorough and savage. He had an army of bootlickers to do his bidding. One time, he planted a young girl, a minor, in my hotel room with a photographer. Cops were standing by to arrest me. Luckily, I was tipped off by a local police officer. Hearst also had friends in the selective service department. Every month, without fail, I report to the draft board. And every time without fail, I was sent back due to my bad back and flat feet.
Hearst's first directive was to John D. Rockefeller, a key RKO stockholder. Hearst pressured Rockefeller to use his influence to cancel the film's premiere at Radio City Music Hall. Hearst prohibited his newspapers from running reviews, advertising, or any story related to Citizen Kane. He pressured the theater chains not to screen the movie. So this limited film release to a small handful of cities severely restricted distribution.
Hearst's skullduggery didn't stop there. He demanded that RKO destroy the film. Hollywood producers who were sympathetic to Hearst wanted to buy the negatives from RKO simply for the purpose to burn them. RKO, much to my surprise and undying respect, refused.
But you also offered to buy Citizen Kane from RKO, but they wouldn't sell.
I would have made a fortune and been financially well off my entire life.
The Hearst organization worked with its political contacts to discredit you, spreading rumors about your communist sympathies. And Hearst went further, stating that anyone that enjoyed Citizen Kane was a treasonable communist.
I once asked one of my critics what they thought a communist was. They said, "Well, everything you make goes to the government." I said, if that's true, then 86% of me is communist, the rest is capitalist.
Citizen Kane became a cause célèbre, a battle between creative freedom and corporate censorship, your art against Hearst's power. RKO released Citizen Kane on September 5, 1951, and despite the opposition, it garnered critical acclaim. Unfortunately, due to the successful efforts of Hearst, the film did not have a wide release.
Citizen Kane was not released. It just escaped here and there.
In a strange twist of fate, you encountered Hearst in an elevator at the San Francisco premiere. Hearst had known your father, and you actually introduced yourself to Hearst and invited him to the opening that night.
He remained silent. When he got off on his floor, I said, Charles Foster Kane would have accepted. He didn't reply. William Randolph Hearst did not attend. He had no class.
As a direct result of Hearst's suppression efforts, Citizen Kane was a commercial failure, tarnishing its reputation and causing RKO to shelve it for over a decade. You were booed at the 1942 Academy Awards when Citizen Kane was mentioned, and although nominated for 9 awards, the film only won Best Original Screenplay. Why do you think?
Citizen Kane was not a Hollywood film. I may not have played the game, but I got the last laugh. Hearst's attempt to kill the film only proved how accurate and devastating my original idea was.
Career-wise, Hearst's vendetta solidified your difficult reputation. His aggressive campaign painted you as untrustworthy, controversial, and uncooperative filmmaker. After the struggle to release Citizen Kane, you lost the full creative control you had been promised. Were you surprised by that?
It's a miracle Citizen Kane survived at all. I regretted early success in many fields, but not with Citizen Kane. It was the only chance I had at that kind. I have been spoiled in a very strange way.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that takes us to the halfway mark. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. Thank you. All right, so picking up where we left off, you follow up Citizen Kane with The Magnificent Ambersons, based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning 1918 novel by Booth Tarkington. It follows the rise and fall of two generations of a wealthy Midwestern family. Your thoughts on Ambersons?
Emerson's was a meditation of the decline of gentlefolk and the rise of the automobile. Everyone in Hollywood thought it was too downbeat. But that's the point of the film, to see how everyone will slide downhill in one way or another.
Well, feedback from the preview screenings was disheartening. Some audiences found it artsy or slow. RKO took control and drastically recut it, changing the bleak ending to a more upbeat one. The length was cut from 131 minutes to 88 minutes. Of the 73 scenes that you shot, only 13 remained unaltered. The scraps of cut film were allegedly tossed in the ocean.
I was in Brazil on a government goodwill tour shooting It's All True, a film about Carnival. By the time I returned to supervise the release of Emerson's, I found that RKO had fallen into the hands of counter-revolutionaries who had performed major surgery on my film. The entire third act was lost because of all the hysterical tinkering. And it was hysterical. Everybody they could find was cutting it.
Your career at RKO ended with The Magnificent Ambersons in 1942. From now on, directors would be chosen for their showmanship instead of their genius. So, by necessity, were you forced to become an independent filmmaker?
I wonder why I had ever looked on Hollywood with such hope and affection. It was a snake pit, a brutal place. My 26-year run in luck had ended. I spent the rest of my life hustling for money and acting gigs to help finance my pictures.
Orson, you've had many passions: magic, theater, radio, film. May we take a break from discussing your films to focus on another of your abiding interests? Politics. A friend of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and an advocate of his New Deal programs, you used your broadcasting skills to garner support for those programs. You were a ghostwriter for Roosevelt during his 1944 presidential campaign, when democracy was under threat domestically, and Roosevelt's opponents had launched an energetic campaign to vilify him. Tell us about that time.
Every day, our liberty was under attack from those who thought they had exclusive rights to freedom. Those who thought they could enjoy the prosperity at the expense of others. Roosevelt knew that in order for American society to progress, we must take a deeper look at democracy. All citizens should enjoy a measurable amount of equality.
Roosevelt joked that actors had the natural shamelessness of politicians. He suggested you run for Senate in your home state of Wisconsin. You declined, so Senator Joseph McCarthy won. An outspoken critic of McCarthy's House Un-American Activities Committee, you were repeatedly investigated but never called to testify.
I was no stranger to the allegations that I was not a patriot. Being investigated was one of America's favorite pastime, a kind of indoor sport. I wasn't going to give names to McCarthy. Those who did give names to McCarthy are just as apprehensible as McCarthy himself.
As an advocate for civil rights, you used your public platform to challenge social inequalities. In a series of radio broadcasts in 1946, you brought national attention to the case of Isaac Woodard Jr., a black decorated World War II veteran who was brutally beaten and blinded by police in South Carolina. Despite overwhelming evidence, the police chief was acquitted by an all-white jury, sparking national outrage, and the incident was a major catalyst for the civil rights movement.
Americans boast that every man has a right to his own opinion. Racism isn't human nature. It is the abandonment of human nature. But this is true. We hate whom we hurt, and we mistrust who we betray. Racism is a disease. In a just world, a racist would have no rights.
You also had concerns regarding the unchecked growth of technology into society and its potential its potential negative impact, correct?
Technology can breed a sickness that comes with too much change in too short of time. The feeling that nothing is permanent anymore. People become overwhelmed and disconnected. My fear is that we become enslaved by a world entirely controlled by computers.
In 1943, you begin a whirlwind romance with actress Rita Hayworth. Do tell.
I saw Rita in a full-page spread of a magazine when I was in South America. I vowed that when I returned to America, I would meet her.
And after a brief courtship, you were married in a surprise civil ceremony on September 7, 1943. You were 28, Rita was 24, and the press dubbed you Beauty and the Brain. Which one were you?
Beauty, of course. I suppose most of us are lonely in this big old world, but we have to fall desperately in love in order to find it out. Rita was my life, my very life. I loved her, and that's all there was to it.
Your daughter Rebecca was born in 1944. Unfortunately, your 4-year marriage was turbulent, marked by your infidelities and disinterests at home. Then in 1946, you directed and co-wrote and starred in your first film noir, The Stranger, with Loretta Young and Edward G. Robinson. The film was part of a 4-picture deal with International Pictures. Why did you take that on?
I took it on to show Hollywood that I didn't just glow in the dark, that I can yell action and cut just like any other director.
The film was rooted in a passionate cause of yours, the abolition of fascism. The thriller focused on the tracking of a Nazi war criminal to a small Connecticut town, and it was the first American film to show documentary footage of the concentration camps.
The thought of death is never pretty. The newsreels testified in quite another sort of death, quite another level of decay.
The Stranger was made on schedule, under budget, and was a commercial success. Despite this, within weeks of completion, International Pictures backed out of the promised picture deal. Next, The Lady from Shanghai was your, The Lady from Shanghai was your second film noir. Regarded as a cinematic masterpiece, you produced, directed, and starred in it with Rita playing the femme fatale. How did Rita feel about that?
Rita saw it as a chance for a plum role and a way to revive our marriage. The honeymoon became a battlefield. I cast myself as the romantic lead, the only actor I could afford.
The climactic fairground arcade Hall of Mirrors scene became one of cinema's most visually iconic and imitated sequences, inspiring filmmakers for decades. And you personally designed and painted the set.
I created a visual and psychological assault on my character and the audience. It also mirrored, pun intended, the tension between Rita and me. We were divorced soon after the picture was released.
Columbia Pictures chief Harry Cohn was unhappy with the results and ordered significant cuts, editing over an hour of footage, leading to the film's convoluted plot. The film was held back for a year and released with little fanfare. How did you feel about that?
They butchered it. The mirror scene was cut from 20 minutes to 3 minutes. They ditched my musical score and substituted by one made by a ham-fisted amateur with little creative imagination. Oh, and in case you were wondering, it was over budget.
In 1948, more than a decade after the stage triumph of Macbeth, you adapted, produced, and starred in a low-budget film version of Macbeth for Republic Pictures. Tell us about that.
Republic Pictures was a Poverty Row studio. They made films quickly and cheaply, mostly westerns starring John Wayne and Roy Rogers. They didn't give a damn about the rules of Hollywood, and they were innovative and playful. They reasoned that Macbeth would give them a patina of culture.
Well, feeling thwarted by a lack of creative control and dependence on studios for greenlighting projects, you decamped for Europe in 1948. Your self-described vagabond period in Europe lasted 3 decades. Never settling in one place for long, you lived in Paris, London, Rome, Munich, Berlin, and Spain. Why?
I was a traveling player, lost in the odyssey of my own making.
You accepted the role of the charming and villainous Harry Lyne in Carol Reed's 1949 film noir, The Third Man. It is one of your most iconic roles, and the only one you played without makeup. On screen for only 10 minutes, Lyne was a post-war racketeer who sold diluted penicillin on the black market. You wrote the famous cuckoo clock speech that encapsulated Lyne's cynical worldview.
Like the fellow said, in Italy, for 30 years, they had, under the Borgias, they had terror, bloodshed, murder, and warfare. But it produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did they produce? The cuckoo clock.
The Third Man made you an international star, offered $185,000 or 10% of the film's gross. You took the cash to finance your upcoming passion project, an adaptation of Shakespeare's Othello. It was the first film since Citizen Kane in which you had full artistic control, and you regarded Shakespeare's works as the great monuments of civilization, and you relished the chance to direct and star in this tragedy. But I understand the film had a rocky start.
The producer went bankrupt the first day of filming. I flew to Nice, got on my knees in front of producer Daryl Zernick, and begged for more money. I came back with a check for $100,000. When that money ran out, I stopped filming and took on acting gigs.
Othello was shot on locations across Morocco, Venice, Tuscany, and Rome. It took 3 years to film and another year to edit. Othello was a critical success in Europe, winning the Grand Prix at the 1952 Cannes Film Festival. Your only foray into ballet, The Lady in the Ice, was a ballet you conceived, wrote, and staged. It premiered in London in 1953, and coincidentally, London was the setting for your production of Moby Dick 2 years later.
Moby Dick was my homage to theater and the power of illusion.
You then direct and starred in the film noir Mr. Arkadin in 1955. And it told the story of a wealthy financier suffering from amnesia who hires a detective to investigate his past.
Mr. Arkadin was a man of many countries and passports and power, but was essentially hollow at the core. He was a parody of Charles Foster Kane.
But once again, the film was removed and re-edited. Paula Mori, an Italian actress and aristocrat who played your daughter in the film, became your third and final wife.
Marrying Paula was the silver lining in the Arkadin disaster. I was certain this marriage would stick. She could cope with me, and, well, that took some doing.
And you also had your daughter Beatrice. The same year, you began a satisfying 3 decades relationship with the BBC. Orson Welles' Sketchbook was a series of 6 15-minute television commentaries on a range of subjects. You drew from your experiences and you illustrated the episodes with your own sketches. Another series, Around the World with Orson Welles, a travelogue filmed entirely in Europe. Your thoughts on television?
Television had untapped potential for storytelling and conversation. Sadly, it didn't live up to its potential. Television crystallized too quickly and became formulaic. I hated television. I hated television as much as I hated peanuts. But I can't stop eating peanuts.
Magic was a recurring theme in your film work, both in front of and behind the camera. During World War II, you created and performed in a magic and variety show for the U.S. service members. In the 1950s, you had a 3-week stint in Las Vegas with your own magic act. And between 1976 and 1985, you worked on an unfinished TV special called Orson Welles' Magic Show. You also performed magic on various television shows, including The Tonight Show, The Merv Griffin Show, and even I Love Lucy. What attracted you to magic?
At the age of 6, I knew I wanted to be a magician. Magic's ultimate purpose in life is to elevate adults to the delightful status of children, even if it's only for an hour or two to get away from the worries of the world.
Next, Touch of Evil, released in 1958 with Janet Leigh and Charlton Heston, represented your comeback as a Hollywood filmmaker. The film, a story of corruption and greed set on the border between the United States and Mexico.
Touch of Evil was about all borders. Law and lawlessness, rich and poor, corruption and honesty, and guilt and innocence.
Things went smoothly until you took a brief break to work on another film. On your return, you found yourself locked out of the editing booth, and Universal Pictures reshot and re-edited the film into a more conventional cut. How did that sit with you?
The atrocities Universal Pictures did on Touch of Evil angered me more than RKO's killing spree of Ambersons. My comeback was a swan song.
Don Quixote was your Valentine to Spain. You worked on the film from 1957 until your death nearly 30 years later. While living in Spain, you developed a lifelong appreciation for the art form and intense experience of bullfighting. You studied the culture surrounding it and counted matadors among your close friends. How did this interest come about?
Ernest Hemingway glorified it. Bullfighting became folkloric. I detest folkloric. Tourists flock to see bullfighting without having any real understanding of what bullfighting is. It became superficial. It wasn't sacred anymore.
Franz Kafka's novel The Trial was chosen for your next film. The Trial tells the nightmare story of Joseph K., a man arrested and prosecuted by an unjust system. It explored the powerlessness of an individual up against an overwhelming and irrational authority. Similarities now, similarities then.
It was the most autobiographical film I ever made. I knew from my history with Hollywood experience what it felt like to be an outsider, fighting against oppressive institutions.
Shot in multiple locations throughout Europe, many of the interiors were shot in the vast abandoned Gare d'Orsay train station in Paris, which later became the Musée d'Orsay. Due to the challenging subject matter, it was not a box office success. Released in 1967, your third Shakespeare film, the comedy drama Chimes at Midnight, is considered one of your greatest works and most personal roles. Connections were drawn between you and Falstaff. Both shared outsized characters and lived lives of indulgence and excess. Would you agree?
And like Falstaff, I was guilty of embellishing the truth. On occasion.
The film's narrative focused on a relationship between Falstaff and Prince Hal, the future King Henry V. It explored the betrayal of their friendship as Prince Hal matures and must choose between his boisterous surrogate father, Falstaff, and his biological father, the austere King Henry IV. What did this relationship mean to you?
Chimes had deep roots in my subconscious. It featured a triangular relationship, much like the ones between my father, Skipper, and Dada. After Prince Hal became king and rejected Falstaff by saying, "I know not the old man," well, it felt like I was rejecting my father all over again.
One of the most critically praised sequences in the film is the brutal and chaotic depiction of the Battle of Shrewsbury. Famed director Martin Scorsese called it the best battle scene on film. And you should know it's influenced the contemporary films of Braveheart and Saving Private Ryan. Chimes at Midnight received an ovation at the Cannes Film Festival of 1966, but in America, they barely knew it existed. Did the lack of popular acceptance by American critics and audiences make you feel that your work was no longer relevant?
I hate this idea of being with it. I think a true artist should always be a step out of time. Don't give people what they want or what they expect. Give them what they never thought was possible.
You began a relationship with Croatian actress and writer Oja Kodar in 1966, while you were still married to your third wife, Paula Mori. Orson?
Our relationship was romantic but creative. Oja was my companion, my muse, my artistic partner, and a brilliant collaborator.
Your next film, F for Fake, a mockumentary released in 1973, dealt with trickery, fraud, and lies. It was the final film released in your lifetime, and it reflected on your history as a trickster.
This old musician still had one more trick up his sleeve. F for Fake was my final farewell to filmmaking. A final sardonic statement about my lifelong obsession with truth and lies.
Orson, as a master of both theater and film, could you please offer your view on the similarities and differences between the two mediums that meant so much to you?
Theater is built on sand. It is ephemeral by nature. The stage is not merely a meeting place of all the arts, but a return of art to life. In a city, big or small, if there's a theater visible, then you know that it has a strong and healthy democratic culture. All filmmaking is a form of illusion, a sleight of hand. Because time passes before the viewer sees the film, it all becomes eventually a little shop-worn. Alas, the lights go down, the play and the film have ended. The lights go out. It's a little death, a goodbye. I hate goodbyes.
Now I would like to broach a delicate subject, one that you have addressed throughout your lifetime with humor and self-awareness: your weight.
Oh,
Now, as an actor, there must have been pressures to maintain a certain look.
crash diets were the first response. Bananas and milk were the old standby. If those didn't work, then you did diet pills. That's back before we understood the harmful effects of amphetamines. If crash diets and pills didn't achieve the look I wanted, I strapped on a steel back brace that made my stomach wonderfully flat.
Knowing your love of rich food and vintage scotch, your doctor admonished you for having intimate dinners for 4, unless there were 3 other people present. Later in life, you employed your razor-sharp wit to deflect comments about your weight. One memorable encounter occurred when you were on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, seated next to actor Robert Blake. Describe that for us.
It hurt to be reminded about my weight. Blake took one look at me and said, "You make Wimpy look skimpy." I said, "Well, I may be fat, but you're ugly. And I can diet."
You returned to America in 1974. Your final years left a graveyard of unfinished projects, including a film version of The Cradle Will Rock and an adaptation of a passion project, Shakespeare's King Lear. Your work habits were intense, inconsistent, a perfectionist who continually refined and revised his work. You claim that insomnia stimulated your creativity.
I was up before 6 a.m. In bed, I would phone associates about my latest film projects. I wrote piles of screenplays. Editing is my greatest joy. To film is human, to edit is divine. I spent 98% of my life hustling and 2% making films.
One of your final projects was The Other Side of the Wind, a satirical drama about a maverick filmmaker who returns to Hollywood to film his comeback movie.
It was sunk by financial and legal problems. It was released 50 years after my death.
You were a popular guest on numerous talk shows during the 1970s and 1980s, regaling viewers with your witty tales of your career and your incisive views on current events. In 1979, you filmed a pilot for your own talk show, but it was never picked up by a network.
The public was hungry for Orson Welles, the storyteller, so I gave them what they wanted. I assumed a producer would see it and give me a project. That never happened.
To raise funds for your projects, you keep yourself in the public eye. You secured acting roles, did voiceovers, and tapes of English language books for the Japanese market. Your spokesperson role for Paul Masson Wines in the late 1970s abruptly ended when on a talk show you attributed your recent weight loss to having given up wine. In 1970, you receive an honorary Oscar for superlative artistry and versatility in the creation of motion pictures. In a pre-recorded acceptance speech, you thanked the Academy for recognizing not just what you had done, but what you hope to do in the future. The American Film Institute then presented you with a Life Achievement Award in 1975. How did you feel about that?
I accepted the AFI award for those of us who travel a lonely and rocky road. Those of us who follow the American tradition of the maverick. We were a vanishing breed. We weren't better, merely different.
You made your final appearance on The Merv Griffin Show on October 9, 1985, opening with a card trick. That evening, you had a lengthy telephone call with your childhood mentor, Skipper Hill, and despite failing health, you were in good spirits, and you told Skipper that you would continue to fight the good fight like a tenacious bulldog to find money for your projects. Death came in the form of a heart attack. Sometime in the early morning hours of October 10, you die, slumped over your typewriter, working on your latest project. As we draw to the end of our conversation, Orson, a final question. Did you have any regrets?
I never understood the people who say they have no regrets. I have as many regrets as there are sands in the desert. My biggest regret is that I fell in love with movies. I could have done more with my life. Things that didn't involve so much money, time, and energy. I can't help this condition of love, but I think I would have been better off without it. To set the record straight, I'm not some walking extra in a Chekhov play. I have no Slavic or Irish gloom. I'm marked only by the happy hours, like a sundial. Otherwise, I would have gone nuts.
Now we come to the portion of our program, a series of questions based on the journalist Bernard Pivot's famous questionnaire. What is your favorite word?
Rosebud.
What is your least favorite word?
Actor. actors. I always felt that there were 3 kinds of sexes: male, female, and actors.
What sound or noise do you love?
My mother's cello voice. It was so soothing.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Policemen and small children.
What is your favorite curse word?
Oh, I don't waste my time with curse words. Why would I when the English language can be so creative and inventive? You jobbernoll goosecap.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Anthropology. I find the study of humans very interesting.
What profession other than your own would you not like to attempt?
Oh, philosophy. It's just so full of doubt.
If heaven exists, what would you like God to say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You have complete creative control. And an endless budget.
Well, Orson, Mr. Wells, your body of work assures you a place in history. Let's take a moment to thank Mr. Wells and our actor Dakota Bosson.
This is an extraordinary team to work with.
Yes.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Am I done now?
No, I have a question.
Yeah,
Where do you get inspired depicting these people that you've written about?
we meet as a group. and go
Okay, it's
through-
not just you?
Well, I suggested Orson Welles. No,
You often did suggest somebody,
Yeah.
but there's been
Yeah.
a lot of us that,
Yeah.
as this took on, years ago, as it started, more actors got really excited about, oh, I'd love to do this, or I'd love to play this person. And Margie was always a part of that too, in terms of the committee. This is a real gift to actors. It's a tough gig. It's a really tough gig, because you're not getting to move and do things. But, so,
We also depend on the personal connections that everybody has, and particularly Margie, about knowing an artist and then thinking, I know somebody who I think could play that person. Because if it wasn't for Margie, I would have done Oscar Wilde.
You played 3 and Lenora's played 3. She was our very first one. George O'Keeffe in 2007. And then Kevin followed playing Dolly in March or April of
Something like
2007.
that. It's a blur.
The script was 13 pages then. This was 43 pages.
Well, 43 pages until last night. Which was the real irony, because we thought we need, obviously, and I made the mistake of saying we're at the halfway point, so there wasn't another hour to come. But we realized it was too lengthy, and so we were sitting here editing in the editing booth and slashing it and figuring, okay, what can we leave in? And, yeah, what's describing the slides.
Marcy create your control.
Do you pick all the slides and the pictures, or who does all that work with you?
I do. I don't want to admit to it by the quality of it, but yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
It's so well put together.
Yeah.
The drama and the laughter and it's,
Well, I love the audience component when you hear like the sighs or the laughter or the,
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's such an important part of it.
Because it's so dry for
It's
us
so
for
dry, yeah.
weeks of doing this, and then to get the feedback at places that you don't expect it.
I love doing more intimate theater where the audience is right there, because you do get to experience all of that. You just have a closer interaction with them. you know, like, okay, I'm on the right track when you hear certain things. Yeah.
What did you do to go to get into the personality of Orson Welles?
I honestly watched every interview I could get on the internet about him. I watched how he talked, how he, you know, would handle the guests. I noticed that he didn't really look at the interviewer. He kind of either stayed straight ahead, and I think Orson was a man who was always constantly in his head and thinking, and I think he was just a man that was just always, he didn't have to do much to be seen. He just had to speak. And
Really
people
forming
listened.
his
Yeah.
words.
So
with
I
that
just wanted
vocabulary.
to kind of, of course, you know, kind of get his voice a little bit. Well, to try to get his voice as I could, but also just kind of see his mannerisms being interviewed. And of course, I've seen, you know, a handful of his films growing up, and you know, especially in college, I saw a lot of his films, and I knew like of his work, and you know, I knew the famous mirror scenes, and I knew all that.
I
There's
just watch
some-
a lot of Turner Classic Movies.
There's
I'm
some that
channeling my
I
Ben Mankiewicz and my James Lipton.
So yeah, it was just mainly watching just how interviews on videos I could find about him.
Just a comment, I think you look like him.
Yeah, thank you. This is the first artist that I've interviewed where there were moments where I thought I was actually sitting next to someone. There were times with his voice and the responses, and I thought, I suddenly felt completely idiotic. You know, like I should be asking for an autograph or something. I mean, what would it be like to sit next to Orson Welles and then ask him questions? You'd be so tongue-tied, you know, and just feel so miniature next to him, you know. But it was fascinating, it was.
Can I say something? I just want to say, these guys got up, they were here in the morning, yesterday morning, 17 below zero, felt like negative 27. They worked so many long, hard hours. This was such a delight to see. They were nice to my dogs. The dogs would come right up. They're both dog lovers, so just bravo. It was just beautiful.
Thank you for your hospitality.
I just want to say, I too, if I could echo in there, it's just, I don't know, sometimes it's the motif that I'm in, that I'm enjoying the meal, right?
Yeah.
And that sets my mood in there, and everything from the gentle carrying on of the messages that you were reading from dialogue, it was disarming,
Yeah.
and I absolutely loved it. The problem is, I have a disease called more. If one tastes good, I just want more.
Well, here's the unedited script.
May I delicately sprinkle in perhaps a medley of all of you beautiful people that come together, one glorious in there. I would just love to see that. So it was just absolutely delightful. Thank you all.
Okay, you come back.
We had bounced around the idea, and 2027 is our 20th anniversary
Yes.
of doing these, and we thought it might be fun to have some of the famous deads
Yes.
come around a round table and discuss the state of the world. That is, if we still have a world.
You're welcome here anytime.
Thank you.
I had visited with Margie a bit before this, and she had told me there's so much more than Citizen Kane and War of the Worlds. I had no idea how, I love the parallel of what's historically going on in the world. And I just have to wonder if you had only run for the Senate.
Yeah.
One of those historical forks in the road, what if?
But you know, there's plenty of like, there's plenty of celebrities out there who I feel like would make a great president, but they just don't. They're like, no, that's really not my area. But it's like, oh, but come on now. Like you know, like I don't know, Stephen Colbert. People always like, come on, man, just run. You know, just run, man. I'm sure, but you know, he doesn't want to, and I
You had a
don't.
question?
I was just gonna thank you for the time and the work that you all put into this to provide that opportunity for us. On a cold day, it was great.
Yes.
Thank you.
I can't wait for the next one.
We don't know when yet.
Maybe will.
Do you have a question?
Maybe I like it.
Out of curiosity, who would you like to see?
Yeah. I have a suggestion. We've talked about this too, Grandma Moses.
You talked to me about that one a long time ago.
God, but she's 100-some years old. He at least kicked off at 70.
Too much
The
rain.
other thing that's
Too much
that's
rain.
interesting is,
Let's do Joan of Arc.
those are the interesting ones too. You have done ones that where it was pre-recorded voices and stuff. Well, Whistler and back in the 1800s.
You're
some of them.
Whistler, yeah.
But it's really neat when you can get on the internet and find interviews, their voices and mannerisms. That's kind of cool. The other you have to.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a
stuff.
question for Marky. In the writing of the dialogue and things like that, some of the things that Orson said were direct quotes from
Yes.
him, right? But a lot of it was your creative license, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So you tried to recreate his voice with the information.
Yeah, hopefully it works out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the pivot questions at the end, my experience with the artists that I have portrayed as well as worked with too, those are all researched. So we find some little snippet that they said that fits into those questions.
And you, as the moderator, Kevin, who served as
Kevin is-
moderator for a while, has said, do not tell me the answers to your questions until we get, and so the actor has to kind
I want to know.
of, we know now, you know now.
Well, I know now, yes.
Did you do Mark Twain?
Oh, did we do Mark
Yes.
Twain?
Me again.
Yeah. That's our record holder.
That's,
Yeah.
actually, the questions at the end were the hardest part, because that back then was left to the actor to come up with the answers.
It still is.
That's not part of the
The actor
written
comes up with
script.
those, yeah.
So, sitting there as the actor and trying to go, okay, what's his favorite curse word? Because like Twain didn't put any profanity in his writing, he just did not do it. But he was known for cursing like everything in his personal life. But just as an actor coming up with the answers, that was a real challenge.
I know when I did Salvador Dali,
Oh, yeah, that was great.
we did it as a piece of performance art, so I got the whole audience involved. We all stood up and everybody covered their ears and at the same time shouted their favorite curse word. So we turned it into a big art, an art event. Yeah.
That would be a good exercise to almost practice daily.
That was.
What's also interesting, and even looking at the crowd here, is we're running into younger people that don't know these people at all. Actually, Dakota, you're young,
Yeah. I mean, like I
but
said,
you're curious
Yeah,
as an
yeah.
actor. And
Yeah.
so-
and like I said, I've seen a handful of those films in college, and I do Citizen Kane, of course, and I've seen.
There were a few dated things I had to explain, like the draft board.
Yeah. I understood
Yeah,
the
you
draft.
might want to know that anyway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you might
But then he's like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Well, anything else?
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Thank you.